Imagine moving into a modest duplex with your parents next door, only to discover that something else has already claimed the space between the walls. Not a neighbor, not an animal, but something that waits for the lights to go out. In West Pittston, Pennsylvania, the Smurl family said that when night fell, their house did not grow quiet. It began to breathe. The air thickened with the stench of rotting flesh. Black shadows slid along the walls, and unseen hands raked claws across bedsheets. According to the family, whatever lived in that home could follow them from room to room, whispering foul obscenities, smashing furniture, and, eventually, attacking their bodies. Priests blessed the house. Holy water was splashed into every corner, and renowned demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren were called in. Yet, year after year, the Smurls insisted the entity grew bolder, more violent, and more intelligent. Tonight, we open the case file on one of America's most controversial and disturbing hauntings. A story of faith, fear, and a family who claimed that hell moved into their home and refused to leave. West Pittston is a small, working-class town in northeastern Pennsylvania, not far from Wilkes-Barre and Scranton. In 1973, after Hurricane Agnes flooded their previous home, Jack and Janet Smurl moved into a red-trimmed duplex on Chase Street with their 4 young daughters. Jack's parents, John and Mary, lived on the other side of the shared wall. At first, the house was simply a practical solution, a place to rebuild their lives. According to their later accounts, the first signs that something was wrong were subtle: a stain that bled through new paint, a cold breeze where no window was open, footsteps pacing in an empty attic. Neighbors would eventually tell reporters that the Smurls were a quiet Catholic family, involved in their church and not known for causing trouble. But inside the duplex, the family later told journalists and authors, something invisible began to dominate every part of their lives. The Catholic Diocese of Scranton would confirm that priests were sent to the home. The case would draw in demonologists, psychologists, skeptics, and eventually television cameras. Some saw a tormented family under extraordinary stress. Others, like investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, believed that what stalked the Smurls' home was not human, not sane, and not interested in leaving quietly. Chronological storytelling. According to the book, The Haunted, One Family's Nightmare, the disturbances began with sounds and small movements. Janet reported hearing heavy footsteps when everyone else was downstairs. Kitchen appliances turned on by themselves. A television burst into flames, then worked normally after being repaired. A newly installed sink reportedly fell from the wall without explanation. At first, the family tried to rationalize each event: faulty wiring, old pipes, settling foundations. But the experiences grew harder to dismiss. Reports described black masses forming in midair, sometimes coalescing into a shape that resembled a human figure before evaporating. Janet claimed that on several occasions, this shadow hovered at the foot of her bed. Their dog, according to the family, was lifted and thrown against a wall. Drawers slid open on their own, and foul odors, described as sulfur, rotten meat, or what Jack called something dead in the walls, would fill entire rooms before vanishing. As the years passed, the activity reportedly intensified. Disembodied voices cursed at the family in English and, they believed, in Latin. One of the daughters said she saw floating figures that looked burned or twisted. On more than one occasion, the grandparents, John and Mary, heard something pounding from inside the walls so violently that they feared the plaster would crack. It was during this period, according to Janet's later interviews, that the presence seemed to shift from harassment to outright physical attack. She described being pinned to her bed, unable to move, while an unseen force touched her in ways that she called degrading and sexual. Jack also reported assaults, claiming that the entity would immobilize him, leaving him with scratches and bruises he could not explain. Both husband and wife later told journalists that these experiences strained their marriage and their faith. By the mid-1980s, according to newspaper coverage, the Smurls believed they were dealing with something demonic. They contacted their parish priest, who blessed the home and instructed them to pray. For a short time, the disturbances reportedly lessened, then surged back with greater force. Religious pictures were said to be slashed, rosaries broken, and the family's prayers mocked by unseen voices. In 1986, desperate, the Smurls reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, a husband and wife team of Catholic demonologists already known for their work on the Amityville case. The Warrens visited the home multiple times. According to their account, they recorded unexplained knocking sounds, sudden temperature drops, and what they believed were inhuman growls captured on audio. Lorraine, a self-described clairvoyant, said she perceived four entities: a harmless elderly woman, a young, angry woman, a man who had committed murder, and a non-human, malevolent presence directing the others. The Warrens claimed that the most powerful of these was a demon that fed on discord, and that it had fixed itself to the family rather than the building. They advised the Smurls to intensify their religious practices and sought permission from the church to conduct a formal exorcism. The Diocese of Scranton later acknowledged that priests had been involved and that masses and blessings were performed, but stated publicly that they had found no clear evidence of demonic possession. Among the many events described by the Smurls and the Warrens, one night stands out as the point when fear turned into terror. According to their accounts, it began with the now familiar sounds, pounding in the walls, a sudden drop in temperature, and the sickly smell of decay rolling through the hallway. Janet later said she woke in the dark to find her mattress lifting off the bed frame, as if invisible hands were raising each corner. She tried to scream for Jack, but, in her words, her voice wouldn't come out. At the same time, Jack reported feeling something climb onto the bed beside him, heavy and cold, pressing him into the mattress. He described claws raking across his chest and an overwhelming sense of hatred that did not feel human in the chaos. One of the daughters reportedly saw a dark, man-shaped figure standing in the doorway, its edges blurred, as if made of smoke. It moved, she said, not by walking, but by sliding across the floor. According to the Warrens, the family's prayers that night were met with guttural laughter and mocking voices that repeated their words back to them in a distorted, growling tone. One of the most chilling claims from this period is that the attacks followed the Smurls even when they left the house. Janet stated that she was assaulted by the entity at her workplace and while visiting relatives, suggesting, in her view, that this was not simply a haunted building, but a haunting that had fixed itself to their family. BY 1986. Word of the haunting had spread beyond West Pittston. Local newspapers began covering the story, quoting the Smurls, their neighbors, and representatives of the church. Some neighbors backed the family's claims, saying they had heard screams and inexplicable noises through the walls. Others told reporters they believed stress, health problems, or the desire for attention might explain the reports. Media attention brought more investigators and more pressure. Organizations focused on debunking paranormal claims suggested natural explanations, misinterpreted sounds from the duplex shared structure, sleep paralysis, hallucinations triggered by stress, and the influence of suggestion within a close-knit family. Ed and Lorraine Warren stood by their conclusions, insisting that the evidence pointed to a demonic presence. They worked with writer Robert Curran to publish The Haunted, a book that laid out the case in detail and further cemented the Smurl haunting in the public imagination. In interviews, Jack and Janet insisted they were not being paid large sums of money and that no book or film offer would be worth living in constant fear. Despite blessings, prayers, and one exorcism led by a priest associated with traditionalist Catholic circles, the family said the activity continued. Eventually, the Smurls moved out of the duplex. Reports from subsequent residents varied. Some claimed nothing unusual happened, while others told journalists they did experience strange sounds and sensations, though not on the same scale the Smurls described. Whether or not one believes in demons, the psychological weight of the Smurl case is undeniable. Jack and Janet described years of broken sleep, constant hypervigilance, and the crushing fear of not being believed. They worried about the effect on their children, who grew up in a house where every creak could mean another night of terror. The daughters, interviewed later, spoke about being ridiculed at school, of hearing classmates whisper about the haunted house on Chase Street. For the grandparents, deeply religious and already aging, the idea that something evil had invaded the space where they prayed and slept was especially shattering. According to accounts in the book and in televised interviews, arguments increased, tempers frayed, and moments of hopelessness were frequent. From a psychological perspective, skeptics suggested that ongoing stress, financial pressures, and medical issues could have contributed to real experiences of fear, sleep paralysis, and hallucinations, phenomena that feel absolutely real to those who endure them. Believers countered that, whatever the mechanism, the result was the same. A family who felt hunted inside their own home. Conclusion today, the house in West Pittston is just another building on a quiet street. Its red trim faded, its legend invisible from the sidewalk. People walk past with groceries and car keys in hand, unaware that for more than a decade it was, according to one family, a battleground between ordinary life and something incomprehensible. The Smurl case sits in a strange space between documentation and doubt. There are newspaper articles, televised interviews, a book, a dramatized film, and statements from priests and investigators. Yet there is no photograph that clearly shows an apparition, no universally accepted recording of a voice, no piece of physical evidence that can silence skepticism. What remains are stories, detailed, consistent, and, to those who told them, painfully real. For believers, the Smurl haunting is a warning that evil can invade even the most ordinary of homes, feeding off stress, doubt, and despair. For skeptics, it is a case study in how fear, suggestion, and trauma can shape perception and memory. But whether you see a demonic siege or a family collapsing under invisible pressures, one image lingers. A house where sleep was no refuge, where prayer was met with laughter, and where even daylight could not guarantee safety. As you turn off this video, and the room around you grows quiet. Remember that for the Smurls, the horror never ended with a closing line. It ended, if it ended at all, only when they walked away from the place they once called home.